Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. First, we'll opening remarks, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Everybody, thank you for joining us today. It's a little unusual for thought because so many things were going on, the revenue and our preparation for the 2021 budget. We thought it would be end session. We thought it would be good to talk with you a little bit early. The toughest time we've been in a very, very long from COVID. Our first responders and businesses and families really struggling with the economic consequences and working hard to be ready to move forward and to help. We're probably going to focus this session for us on a 2-year budget in a really balanced way on the really big things that we will be focused on. So I know that you all probably have a lot of questions, a lot of things you want to talk about. I'm just going to open it up. He's got a couple comments, then we'll take your questions. I'm also happy that we've got with the Senate. So Senator Billig.
Glad to be with you, and we'll try to do a few of these availabilities between now and session, and certainly continue throughout the session. And yes, very similar to the speaker, we're really focused on the pandemic and both the health emergency and the economic emergency. And we know, of course, that we're not going to have economic success until we get the pandemic under control. And of course, that's also a huge urgency in terms of keeping everybody safe as well. I was glad that the legislature, the budget chairs and the speaker and I, majority leader, and the deputy majority leaders in the Senate were worked with the governor on the relief package that was announced a couple days ago, $135 million. And that's CARES Act money. And I know there have been questions about special session and the budget stabilization account, and that's certainly a worthy discussion to have. But the first thing we should do is to react quickly, and the best way to do that is with CARES money because it is expires at the end of the year and it can be distributed quickly. It's going in the process right now. And it also has some fewer restrictions, so it's easier to use as relief money. So that's been the priority. I'm pleased that we were able to move so quickly on that, and we're already working on some next steps. I think as we look ahead to session, there's certainly a lot of logistical challenges, which we're happy to talk about if you have questions about that. And the priorities for the Senate, very similar to the House. This pandemic has exposed and really exacerbated cracks in our communities, in our society, and those in whether it's in education or healthcare, childcare, racial justice. In all of these areas, we had emergencies before and a crisis before, and it's even more of a crisis now. So that's what we're focused on. We're focused on a recovery that works for everyone, both from a health perspective and an economic perspective. And a lot of people are hurting out there, and it's heartbreaking to hear those stories, those families that are missing somebody at this Thanksgiving. But there is hope with vaccines coming. We just got to all take responsibility for our Thanksgiving plans and wearing a mask and social distancing so that we can all get to that point in the future safely. And appreciate everybody in Washington stepping up to help us all get safely through this. And we can do it together. So with that, we're glad to take questions. Rachel, is Rachel on?
All right, technical difficulties. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Well, for both Senator Billig and Representative Jenkins, Speaker Jenkins, what do you see as the responsibility of the legislature in the absence of congressional action in addressing all of these various needs that are popping up new every week, it seems, the longer that we're not seeing anything come out of Congress?
Go ahead, Laurie, if you want to start.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just going to start off, Rachel, by saying it's completely irresponsible that the U.S. Senate and the president aren't moving forward. We've had a bill that the House passed months ago to provide help to our local communities and to state governments, and it's just heartbreaking what they're allowing to happen. With no federal government intervention. That said, should that not come, then it's going to fall to us to do everything that we can to help people in this state. And that's what we're going to do. And I think that's what we're focused on by making sure we get all the CARES Act dollars out this year. When we come back early next year, we're going to have to look at what we've got in the rainy day fund and find other really creative ways to be both providing some breaks, especially for our small businesses. But then at the same time, we've got to be making investments when it comes to basic things like food and shelter for people in this state. There is just no way without federal help that we are going to be able to do everything that is going to need to be done for the people of the state of Washington. And I continue to hope, and we will continue to work with our federal delegation to try and get action to be taken back in the other Washington. But we'll keep on doing everything that we can here too.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And Rachel, I appreciate how you phrase that question, because it really is all connected to what happens in Congress, and particularly with the U.S. Senate. And there's a lot we can do here, but there's a scale that the U.S. government can help us with that we just never will be able to do. Even when we get through the CARES Act money, even if we go into the rainy day money, the idea of being able to extend those unemployment benefits, and that's one of the things that's most concerning to me right now. We absolutely need a federal help with that. And quite frankly, that's their job. That's our federal government, all of us coming together as federal taxpayers. That's what we need the federal government to do. We have a role to play in assistance. We took a first step with that aid money that was announced last week, or I shouldn't say first step, because that was a step in a long sequence. We have another step to take with CARES money, and then we'll look at BSA to be able to address all the needs that we can address at a state level.
The reality at this point, at least, is the state's having to deal with this on its own. Who knows what it'll look like in January, but right now there are real issues and we're on our own. So does the legislature have an obligation to have more input or to be able to take action sooner than January? As you know, your Republican colleagues have been calling for a special session for a while now. So why not come in and start that process a few weeks early?
Well, they called for a special session over the summer, all the information, and I'm really glad that we, and I think here it's the same thing. Let them we best deliver for the people of Washington State, and that's by using the CARES by the governor, but with input. And we are able to have a say in that. Let's get that money out first, and then if we get to all that money out, and we still need to do something, well, certainly if the governor calls a special session, we'll be there ready to work.
That CARES Act money out and investing it in ways that really support our citizens, whether it's, help for rental assistance or small business assistance. In the last batch, there was a utility preparing for is so that we are ready on day one to do the people's business.
And I'll just add to that, in the Senate, we've had that special committee on economic recovery that has been meeting consistently through the summer and now, and really working on hearing from experts around the country on how do we move forward. So even though we're not in special session, we're doing all the work that it takes to be ready for session. And that's been a great bipartisan effort led by Senator Frocht, and we should be seeing good recommendations coming out of that. So there's a lot of work that has been going on this entire time and will continue to do so.
Thank you, Rachel. Next, we'll go to Austin Jenkins with the Northwest News Network. Austin, go ahead.
I thought I had to. Couldn't unmute myself. Now I can. Thanks, Aaron. So Senator Gingrich just mentioned working in bipartisanship fashion, but the reality is that I think we're at a historic low right now in terms of split legislative districts, which tells me that we are a very divided state. The Republican leaders haven't really been a part of the news conferences we've seen with the governor. And so I'm just curious how you as leaders are thinking about governing with the majority at a time when we are so polarized. And there is obviously, in some corners of the state, great mistrust about the way that the governor is doing this. And just sort of what your role and obligation is to try to bring people together and perhaps bring Republicans more to the table and to also show the public that there is a balance of power and that the legislative branch is not just letting, as some would say, the governor be a dictator, which is some of what you see on social media these days.
Yeah, I mean, Austin, you see an awful lot of things on social media these days. I guess my first response would be that wouldn't be the place that I would suggest people get their information from. But I think in the House, we've had an incredibly long-standing bipartisan approach to budget development, to inviting our Republican colleagues in, even though they haven't been in the majority, to invite their suggestions, their input. They're getting briefings about the budget, all of those kinds of things. And when you look at the more recent history of the House, somewhere around 90 to 95% of the bills that we pass off the House floor actually are passed off with wide bipartisan support. So I think we have an excellent record of doing that. We'll continue to have an excellent record doing that. But I would say, because the Democrats are in the majority in the House, we have an obligation to work very strongly with the governor to make sure that we're getting help out to the people of the state. And that's what we're focused on doing.
One of the examples I'll give is as we worked on session logistics, we had numerous meetings with our Republican colleagues on the F&O committee or in leadership. It was leadership to leadership meetings. I think we had 2 full meetings as well as numerous other one-on-one discussions. And so, that's an example of how we work together. Not that we're going to agree on everything, but one side doesn't have an exclusivity on good ideas. And many of the ideas that we heard from the other side were incorporated into the plans for special session. And I think even though maybe there wasn't a unanimous support for the final version, I think that there was an appreciation that there was bipartisan work going on. That's just one example of a really tough situation, a tough challenge that we're facing, that we're doing it together. And that's the tradition that we have. We're not going to always agree, but we're going to always try to work together.
And I'll also counter that and add, I mentioned the Special Committee on Economic Relations on the Ways and Means Committee, the Behavioral Health Subcommittee, Law and Justice, Healthcare, Republicans and Democrats at the table, getting updates on how totally agree with Speaker Jenkins. I don't think it makes social media, but a lot of the stuff that we have been doing that's covered by the actions, and all of the actions that you will see shows both Republicans recover from COVID moving forward.
Sorry, Austin, you're unmuted now. Do you have a follow-up?
Briefly, we have seen, what the public has really seen, though, is the governor holding news conferences for the last 9 months. Much of the work you're describing hasn't been that visible. And so, again, I'm just thinking about the power that it would have if the governor and all 4 legislative leaders were delivering these messages. Or 40 plus states have had special sessions. Just the symbolism of having the legislative branch come in at a time when $2 billion in federal funds are being spent, and when the governor has been operating the state under emergency powers for so long, take social media out of the equation. This has been pretty remarkable, and it's been going on for a long time. And I do think that there is a sense out there, at least among a great number of Washingtonians, because we are so polarized, that something is out of whack here or off kilter, and it's concerning to them. And so I just, again, want the majority party to be able to address that sort of one Washington notion that you've often talked about that doesn't seem like it's necessarily permeating or percolating across a very divided state right now.
Yeah, Austin, I just don't agree with that, that it's not, that's not happening. Want it to be happening more, but I understand your point and agree that maybe it hasn't been as visible. But, I don't think it's a good idea for us to spend the money or take the risk, the health risk for our staff or for members to all gather. And, when you talk about other states, major things that have happened. One, they've gone in to a $200 million COVID bill right as we were leaving session because we were able to get a heads up on what was happening. And I appreciated the team together and passed that very significant bill that has funded a large part of our health response. The second thing people are coming into special session for, it was to adjust their voting laws so they could handle voting during a pandemic. Well, Washington was leading that a decade or 2 decades ago. So we already had that completely handled. We're the leaders in the country in remote voting, so we didn't need to do that. The third thing people are coming in to do is to cut their budgets. Special session to cut the budgets. We were patient on that, and that turned out to be the right decision, because rather than cutting services at during a crisis time for people of Washington State, we're able to maintain services, and the revenue forecast came in better. So we're going to come into special session when we need to come into special session when the governor calls us. But I just don't think.
Just to add quickly, I so agree with this is not a time for symbolism at all. This is a time for action, and when we can help people, doing it every single way we can. I think that's what we've been doing. I think the other thing that we have done really, really well as a Four Corners is, the governor has issued a number of proclamations, literally dozens of them, that are only in effect for 30 days. And then the Four Corners, the majority and minority party leaders have to sign a letter to extend those for additional time. We've extended, I think, nearly all of them, but the Republicans have definitely had instances, as have Senator Billig and I, where we wanted an alteration to a proclamation that was made, and then we extended them. So that's a place where we are getting a really strong four-corner input, and then moving forward to make sure that we're protecting the people of the state and working together to do it.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Essex Porter with Cairo TV. Essex, go ahead.
Yes. Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking my question. I have a question and a follow-up. Have had about helping small businesses, specifically until April or so, and the idea of deferring the license. What do you think of those ideas for helping small businesses?
Because he's done the most work on this in this area, at least in the House.
Yeah, and we'll take a look at those suggestions as we move into session. And we've got a group that's putting together a list of ways that we want to help Washingtonians as well. And even with the federal package that hopefully will come at some point between now and we get into session, or at least by early January, we need a state package as well. And so our team will work across the aisle with the Republicans on a package of bills to really assist not just small businesses, but individuals who are really struggling during this difficult time.
I just want to add, like Essex, so I mean, the idea of giving a B&O tax break to folks who aren't actually doing anything that's taxable right now. I mean, I'm not criticizing it as an idea. It's just that that's not going to be enough. So it's definitely a good idea and a good place to start. But when we look at our restaurants, for example, they're probably not really incurring many taxes right now, unfortunately. So we want to look beyond just that relief.
And we've got a lot of other business priorities that we're looking at. Unemployment insurance rates is something we're hearing a lot about, that we're concerned about. Childcare is certainly a business priority. Healthcare is a business priority. So I think we'll look at all of those.
Essex, you have a follow-up?
Yes, and not sure who should take this one, but to deal with social equity when it comes to forced work is underway. I'm just wondering if there will be, especially for African Americans, to own cannabis retail shops.
Oregon is, I think, the co-chair of that task force. And I talked to her briefly just a few days ago. And I think the question is really, the task force has just started meeting. It's not really clear that they're going to have recommendations that are going to be ready for this, for the session. If they do have recommendations that are ready that fit into the category of COVID response, economic, moving forward on kind of economic recovery, racial equity issues, certainly those are things that we're going to want to consider.
All right, and next we will go to Jerry Cornfield at the Everett Herald. Jerry, go ahead.
Speaker Jenkins, I'm going to start with you. This question, just how quickly will action be taken? There's all this talk about we want to be ready on day one. There are some looming deadlines, I think, for school districts by the end of the month. Workers needed it yesterday. So when will the first votes be taken, do you think, in the House or Senate on something?
Well, I mean, about how we operate. So we'll be starting off about some of the economic work that we are going to be in. I mean, it's my hope that we're going to be able to take action in the first things for bills and things like that. But we'll be driven is or is not doing, watching the CARES Act, how effective that is, and whether or not we have any left by issues related to how coronavirus is developing. So I'll tell you exactly a date that we're going to be taking votes on things. We've got to move fast, and we will be prepared with a package to move forward very quickly.
Senator Billig, your members, and there were some members of the House as well, sent a letter to the governor last week. Their goal is to 25% occupancy for restaurants. The governor rejected that idea at this point. Is your caucus ready to introduce legislation right off the bat that would try to override that and assure that restaurants don't stay closed down?
Well, let's hope by the start of session that restaurants are back open. But I think it's reasonable people can disagree on the specifics of any one of the orders. But where everybody is in agreement, at least everybody in our caucus is in agreement, is that we have a health emergency and action needs to be taken to protect the people of Washington State and make sure that the healthcare isn't overwhelmed or more overwhelmed than it already is. And so, I mean, I think that's where the agreement is, and there may be little disagreements. We've got a big tent, and we don't all agree exactly the same. Again, had a good dialogue, so he's open to discussion, and it may influence future decisions that he makes. And I appreciated that was open to listening. So I think that will yield more positive dialogue, and I think we've just got to keep it. And the best thing that all of us can do, the authors will be responsible with your holiday plans and wearing a mask and social distancing.
Now, I think we have time for one more, and we'll go to Sarah Gensler from McClatchy. Sarah, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Aaron. So this morning at a press conference with the Hospitality Association, I think it was Representative Springer who mentioned a test of the remote system that you guys will hopefully be adopting and in preparation. I'm wondering, how has that been going? Are there any concerns about that being ready for a smooth start in January?
I would say it's going great, and there are big concerns, right? It's the technology. I've presided over 2 practice sessions so far in the House. I think they're going really well, but members to train themselves and to get trained on how to use it. So that's why we're having a number of practice sessions to make sure we have a lot of broadband. They have adequate broadband service, that they know how the system works. So I have a lot of confidence, Sarah. It would be very complicated to do it tomorrow, but I feel really confident that we'll be trained and ready to go.
Monica, do you want to comment on our group?
Sure. I'll just say, we've been practicing in the Senate as well. And we're doing a lot of work with having members use both Teams and Zoom. And, I'd say people are learning. All of our interim meetings have been online. Our committee work, our work sessions have been through Zoom. And I see people improving how they're using technology on a weekly basis. And this is why we do the work that we do in preparing people and doing the practices, is to really make sure we iron them out. So I'm very hopeful that we will be doing well. I was actually very hopeful and very impressed with how well this has gone. I was a little concerned about how this would go. And so, I'd say hopeful is a word, but I will say, I think everyone needs to be patient. We're going to need a lot of patience in January.
And one upside, I agree with all of that. And one upside I'll say as we're making the preparations, access is going to be easier for people that have mobility challenges, or people who live, my constituents who live, a 10-hour round trip from Olympia. over a snowy mountain pass will get to testify from their own homes. And that's going to be a silver lining, and hopefully some lessons we'll learn that we'll be able to even carry forward.
Well, and then I'm excited about all of these things, so I'll just add a little piece in that. The other thing is, for the first time in history, perhaps, the House and the Senate are going to operate committee hearings identically. And so constituents won't need to learn how to handle a Senate hearing differently than appearing at a House hearing. And I think that's great news for constituents across the state.
Sarah, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. So you've spoken about this learning curve for legislators and making sure that they have the broadband access, and how that's been a bit of a challenge, and then simultaneously having this transparency for the public. So do you have a plan in place to make sure the public can actually access this same technology and participate productively? Or they have that information at least on how to access it in time for session?
Well,
Yeah,
go ahead, Andy. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think, we will have all of the information out. We're working on sort of the sequence of when you have to request to be, you sign in to testify, and then you get a link. So we're working on all of that. And there will be challenges, we've talked about that, but there are going to be challenges of people that don't have access to broadband, and how do they testify? But those challenges actually, I think, will be less than the challenges of how do I get to Olympia? How do I get childcare so I can go testify? How do I get off work so I can go testify? So there were a lot of barriers to people coming to testify in Olympia. I think there will still be barriers, but I think the barriers will actually be lower. And I think you hit on a great point. We got to make sure we get all the information out really clearly, and that communication are things that will happen in the time leading up to session for sure.
All of our committee hearings and all of our floor action, we've been working with TVW. That will all be televised, as it has historically been. The other thing is, as a add-on to Senator Billig's comments, is I think for the first time ever too, we're going to allow email testimony to come into committee hearings. I mean, lots of times people send emails to members of a committee about a topic area, but it's not actually put in the record as a testimony for a committee hearing. And we're going to be allowing that both by email and by snail mail. So we want to provide as much broad access to the public to provide their input as we can.
Members, do you have any final thoughts for us before we close down?
Just thanks to everybody who watched. Thanks to all the reporters for the good questions. We'll keep this. We want it to be more accessible. And quite frankly, it's easier to be accessible remotely to do these rather than having to all gather in one place. So I think you'll see more access in the weeks leading up to session as well as during session. So you'll see another one pop up on the schedule soon. And thanks, everybody.
Yeah, and I would just add in to everyone, have a wonderful Thanksgiving and holiday season. But please stay safe. Keep your groups small, wear your masks, social distance. Make sure you understand what your bubble is and don't go outside of it, because you're likely to save somebody's life by doing it.
Thank you, everybody.